You're listening to episode 33 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness researchers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Kellie Edwards joins us from Australia to talk about her program, Mindfulness for Mothers. For many of us, it helps to have a more rigorous structure to our practice. But that can be challenging amid other daily life activities like school, work, and perhaps the most underrated full-time, no-pay job there is, motherhood. New programs like Mindfulness for Mothers may help fill that gap and provide the needed impetus to ongoing contemplative practice. Kellie Edwards is a facilitator of mindfulness in the family, the workplace, and beyond. She runs group workshops and individual coaching sessions integrating mindfulness practices and the psychology of flourishing. She writes a blog with Huffington Post and also other guest blog spots. She is a qualified meditation teacher, a registered psychologist, and a member of the Australian Psychological Society. She has also completed Cultivating Compassion training with Stanford University Sea Care faculty. The mother of two girls, Kellie lives in Melbourne, Australia. Our guest today is Kellie Edwards. Kellie, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Ted. It's a pleasure.
Get started by asking you to tell us a bit about your background and how you first encountered contemplative practices.
Well, I'm the mother of two girls, 8 and 6 years old. I'm a psychologist, and I've always been interested in well-being and the psychology of flourishing and how our emotions affect our well-being. And I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher. So I've been meditating on and off since my 20s, but it wasn't until I became a mother, I think, that I really started to practice in a more dedicated way. And like so many people, I think I came to mindfulness and particularly loving kindness practice or metta meditation because of a need.
So it's interesting you mentioned that you came to the practice and it really heightened when you became a mother. And I've heard other practitioners who are moms say the opposite. They've been practicing quite actively until they became a mom and then they didn't have time. For you, it was the other way around. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, it's probably not exactly the other way around. I don't think I really became a dedicated mindfulness and loving kindness practitioner as a mother until a little bit down the track. But, motherhood is so tough, and we're so unprepared, really. Even if we are very diligent and very excited about becoming a mother, I don't think anything other than actually becoming a mother is the real preparation for it. And, even if it's a dream come true, which it was for me, and full of joy, certainly, it's also overwhelming. There is this unrelenting focus on another dependent human being, enormous emotional investment in the outcome of what we're doing. And I think as a woman and perhaps it's accentuated as a mother, we can very quickly go to self-criticism and self-doubt, worry about whether what we are doing is the best we could possibly do, whether it's the right thing for our child. And I think, being a bit of a perfectionist anyway, I think I went into overdrive. I think that I did forget about mindfulness. I did forget what I could be doing for myself. So when I say I became dedicated as a mother, it certainly wasn't straight away. And I would certainly agree that in the early days, I would have felt exactly the same, that I didn't have any time for myself or to prioritize looking after myself. You know, I love this quote from Annie Lamont. It says, there are places in the heart we don't even know exist until we love a child. And I think that's what it was like for me. And the vulnerability was so unexpected. And when I finally remembered the difference that mindfulness and mindful self-compassion could make, that was when I think I really started to relax into my role as a mother more. And I wasn't so demanding on myself or my husband for that matter. And I really started regaining some calm. You know, I felt more like it was on solid ground again. So yeah, I concur completely with what others have said to you about the lack of time. But I think when I just had that aha, oh my goodness, you know, there's something else I could be doing here to be looking after myself and resourcing myself for motherhood, then I think I really came to it and prioritized it and made space for it because of the incredible benefit I was gaining.
Kellie, you had mentioned being a mindfulness instructor. Was that something you were doing prior to becoming a mother, or is that something that grew out of your practice?
It's something that grew out of my practice. I think I've become quite passionate about the need for self-care as a mother, that it's a necessity, not a luxury. And I became really very, very aware of how many other mothers around me were also suffering more than was necessary. You know, we often pay lip service to the notion that parenting is tough or motherhood's tough. And there's kind of this, yes, and, you know, is that as far as it goes? Because my practice was being so helpful, it was so beneficial to me, I went off and did some formal teacher training. And I don't think at that time I really had an understanding of wanting to create something like mindfulness for mothers. But I knew that I wanted to integrate it into my work as a psychologist. I knew that my own personal experience of how that integration worked could be of benefit to others. And so it wasn't really when I did my teacher training that I understood what it would become.
So what were some of the things that prompted you to develop Mindfulness for Mothers as a program? What led to that?
Well, I think I'd learned so much that had made such a difference to me as a mother. I wanted to get my teachers and these experts in mindfulness and psychotherapy and neuroscience, all of whom had been practicing mindfulness and meditation for decades, longer than I have, to talk to mothers about how they too could benefit from these practices. You know, not just on the cushion or the chair, as I often say, but in the moment-to-moment experience of our day. You know, what can mothers who are already feeling overwhelmed, you talk to any mother and they'll tell you they've got a list of things that they want to get done in the day, and at the end of the day feel disappointed and frustrated and by how little they've achieved, so to speak. And I knew that whatever we put forward to mothers needed to be informed by that, you know, that we needed to speak to people who understood this from their own personal experience of being a parent as well. You know, what did you do? How did you find time for your mindfulness practice when you became a mother or a father? And what helped? To have been able to get those insights from, you know, some fabulous people like Tara Brach and Sylvia Borstein and Holly Young-Eisendrath, Rick Hansen, Christine Carter, you know, just to name a few, some of the faculty of C-Care from Stanford University, to have been able to talk to them specifically about what it's like to be a mother in that demanding role Rick Hansen has this quote where he says that mothers routinely will say that being a mother is the most rewarding thing they've ever done. And then they will pause and say, and also the most demanding. And fathers too, who are increasingly playing, a larger part in the upbringing of their children also will say, wow, this is fantastic, but boy, my life has changed. So really, I think it was about being able to make this kind of wisdom and insight and really soothing practices accessible to mothers at a time when, if you were to say to them, oh, look, there's a class just down the road at 7:00 at night, they would say, are you insane? Do you have any sense of the logistics involved in me getting out of the house? So to be able to provide something online where people can download this and listen to it in their own time, to fit it around their schedule and do it in a way that is not introducing even more stress into their environment was something as an idea that grew.
So tell us about the program itself. How does it work? What does it do? What's in there?
So there are 3 parts to the program. Part 1 is the interviews with the kinds of people that I mentioned earlier, where we ask them how they can bring their expertise and their wisdom to the task of motherhood. And also they give us some practices themselves that they have found beneficial. And then in part 2, we kind of deepen that and talk to some parenting practitioners, people who've worked in this space before, and get them to help us pull out the gold from the interviews, if you like. And then part 3 is the downloadable guided meditation or mindfulness exercises. And some of those are more substantial for when a mother can find 5 or 10 minutes to be still and create some space for resourcing themselves. And others of them are in the moment practices, things that they can do when they're noticing that their emotions are kind of spiraling out of control, or their child is in distress and they're noticing their own reactivity to that. So there are things that people can do in that moment. And also just the simple idea, for instance, of just pausing. How can we just, as we go through our day, just pause, focus in on our breath again, and just take a moment to just recenter. Just a whole collection of things that I think mothers will find really useful, specifically designed for mothers. Oh, and Ted, I should also mention there's also a workbook that supports that practice, and a Facebook community where people can engage with each other and also get sort of little bits of tips and quotes and helpful kind of guidance to support their program.
Kellie, since you've started the program, what are some of the more rewarding things that have happened in not just the development of the program itself, but in people's initial use of it?
I think by far the most rewarding thing is to hear mothers tell us about the difference that it's making. For some, it's reconnecting with a practice. As you mentioned before, some other mothers that you've spoken to have said that when they had their children was the time when they had the least amount of time available. And so for some women like that, it's a reconnection with a practice that they already have established. For others, it's something they're doing for the first time. There's a page on our website where a few of those kinds of experiences that people are having are being shared. It's really lovely to hear people say about how they're turning towards themselves in kindness and soothing that pain. So rather than that voice of criticism and doubt, now mothers are starting to say that's an opportunity for me to soothe myself, to be kind to myself, to suspend judgment, and just to be aware of what's going on for me. Because as I said, as a mother, we're really good at looking after other people, but we often put ourselves last. And, research has shown that perhaps the single biggest predictor of child outcomes is the well-being of the mother. So even if we don't do it for ourselves, if the starting point, if our access point is to think of what's in our children's best interest, then looking after ourselves is. So I think that's probably the most rewarding feedback that I've had, is that it's making a difference in mothers' lives, that they are not getting caught up in that self-judgment or anxiety or overwhelm, that they're finding a way to regain their sense of connection with themselves, that they're feeling more connected to their children, that they're feeling more able to be present with their children and not distracted by their list of things to do or by their own emotional reactivity. People have said, thank you from my whole family, and that's marvelous. That's exactly what we want to be doing.
It's interesting you used the word vulnerability earlier in reference to a child, but having the bravery to embrace our own vulnerability is one of the hardest things we do, and yet that's also one of the best ways to open that door to mindful presence and the ability to be compassionate towards yourself and others.
Yes, indeed. And yet, to attempt to do that without having some kind of self-soothing or self-care practice can seem too scary. And I think one of the things that I feel is really important and really valuable about the Mindfulness for Mothers program is that it is really centered around that self-soothing, loving kindness, turning towards ourselves, being on our own side. And that makes it more likely as a mother that we are able to open up to that vulnerability a little more, that it doesn't scare us so much. And as you say, that opens the door to a much stronger connection to ourselves, but also to all of those around us, whether it's our children, our partner, other family members or friends. And that's where the joy of parenting is, that connection and being available to that love.
So what are some of the challenges that you've had along this path of developing the program and standing it up and supporting it?
Well, probably the same challenges that a lot of other mothers have, which is the sheer logistics and time that it takes to actually put something together when you are simultaneously looking after children. I could not possibly have done this a few years ago before my children were at school. That creates enough space to be able to invest in something like this. But even so, it's very disjointed. And, it makes it all the more real for me, though, when I hear mothers say things like, I find it incredibly difficult to juggle what are seemingly conflicting priorities of, my work, my partner relationship, my children's needs, my health and fitness, and myself, time for me to connect to my friends. I think that it's a really big challenge. And I think that mindfulness and mindful self-compassion are things that make that possible. You can reconnect to yourself. But yeah, the sheer logistics of getting something together when you are caring for children as well can be a real challenge. But as I said, it's also a lesson in action. It's a mindfulness practice in action. It's very real and very humbling. You don't get too far ahead of yourself in this game.
So what are you hoping people will get from the program?
The first word that comes to mind is relief. It's a relief for mothers to hear not only from me, this is not one person's opinion of a self-care practice for motherhood. This is, people who have been working in this area their whole lives, What a relief it is to hear people like that say, if I hadn't had this mindful self-compassion practice, I would have gone insane. Gosh, it's not just me, other people feel this. I think that is one of the earliest liberating things to get out of this, is to hear so-called experts be so open and honest about how challenging motherhood or parenthood was for them as well. And I think Tara Brach has this gorgeous little expression at some point where she says when her son was very young, she committed to practicing every day, but that was the extent of the commitment. If she only got to the end of the day and realized she hadn't done anything, she would sit on the end of her bed and simply follow her breath for as little as 1 minute. and then say, there you are, I've kept my commitment. And she says something like, you put your tush on the cush and you take what you can get. And just to have that realism to the whole thing, we're not talking about you two can feel, calm and collected if you find an extra hour a day to meditate. It's not that at all. So I think that's the first thing, is to feel that relief and connection to other mothers that find this challenging as well. I think it's really important that people understand this is not another set of instructions on how to be a perfect mother. I think there are a lot of sources of pressure for parents who are so emotionally invested in doing a good job, doing the best that they can, that there are lots of so-called experts that will give you a long list of instructions on what you need to be. But this is about self-care. This is about saying the best thing you can do for yourself and your child is to look after yourself. And so what I hope most is that mothers do that they prioritise their self-care, and that they understand that that's in their own interest as well as their children's. And I think the other part of that, though, is going beyond that and saying, a little bit like what you were saying before about vulnerability being the door to, an open heart, is that understanding that self-care is also the door to greater fulfillment in parenting. That since I've been practicing myself, I can reflect back on the very early days when, yes, I was thrilled to be a mother, but I was under enormous pressure, and joy of parenting, I would have moments of it for sure. But now I can truly say I am more lighthearted and more engaged and enjoying my children so much more, because I'm feeling both stronger and softer in myself as a result of how I am prioritising my own care. I think another thing that's really important to understand is that these kinds of practices give mothers more choices in how they respond, and to have renewed confidence that they can be the parent they want to be for their child. When we're stressed and tired and under pressure, we can get really caught up in our own reactivity. Stress narrows our options. We know that from psychology, from the wonderful work of people like Barbara Fredrickson, who we interviewed, who has sort of mapped the way emotions affect us, and also from our studies of the brain, that we know that when we're under stress, we get tunnel vision, we get locked in, and we can only really see one way of dealing with a situation. And as a mother, opportunities like that come up multiple times a day. Your child starts to have a meltdown about something, and inside your head you say, oh no, here we go again. Your stress level rises, and you can so easily get locked into negative patterns of interacting with your child. And only afterwards, when it's all blown up, do you think, wow, how did that happen again? And I think when we are practicing mindfulness and practicing self-compassion, we become more aware of what's going on with our own emotions, and we can interrupt that reactivity earlier. First of all, we become aware of it, then we can turn towards it in kindness and say, oh, here we go, I'm getting upset again. It really pushes my buttons when, she screams like that. And instantly there's a different kind of physiology going on, and we are more able to see more options for how we respond to it. I think that's really a critical benefit of these kinds of practices.
Wonderful way to put it. For those who are listening, you can find out more about mindfulness for mothers on the website, mindfulness, 4, mothers.com. Our guest today, Kellie Edwards. Kellie, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to hear more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.